The Baltic Sea turns near the mouths of the Vistula and the Neman to the north at the very length in which the Black Sea, as the most distant outlet of the Mediterranean Sea, extends far to the north. The Baltic Black Sea Bridge, aka Intermarium, is located here, our place in the world. The film is based on an essay by Jacek Bartosiak. Considered by our ancestors as the most important of the geopolitical zones on the continent when it comes to influencing the balance of power in Europe, it is a separate geopolitical construct with state-forming organizational capacity. It resembles a wide transition strip between Western Europe and Eastern Europe, and it can be seen that it is connected with the plain terrain of the huge continent of Eurasia. Meanwhile, located west and extended towards the World Ocean, the western part of Europe has been under the influence of the breath of the sea throughout its history. Europeans created world empires from the base in the Western Europe by accessing the World Ocean. The sea decisively influenced the economic development of maritime Europe. However, the part of Europe located closer towards Asia, starting from the eastern part of the Baltic Black Sea Intermarium region, already has a continental character. The impact of the sea has already been clearly reduced here. Everything what happens here is heavily weighted in this huge and overwhelming continental landmass from the east. And only the Black Sea divides this huge block of land hanging from the east, as if separating it into two segments. From there, invasions with a clear continental character came from Europe. It is continental spaces that have determined the directions of political and economic development of the region and, to a large extent, its status and political anchoring. It is continental Europe, although it is still between the seas, hence the concept of the Baltic Black Sea Intermarium, creating a peculiar spatial block with its three frontiers opening to the Asian continent, even if along the way you would have to cross some outlets of the marginal seas around Europe. Both European geopolitical orientations, sea and continental, meet on the Baltic Black Sea Intermarium. The transitional location of this place between Europe proper and the great spaces of Eurasia did mean that both Western European political forces heading east, as well as the political forces of Imperial Russia, unfaltering for several centuries, aimed at subordinating or destroying all political organisms throughout the entire Intermarium. Above all, they tried to prevent the creation of a unified political state organism covering the geographical whole of the Baltic Black Sea Bridge, covering, after all, a huge area of about 1 million square kilometers. Between the mouth of the Oder, the Vistula and the Daugava River to the Baltic Sea, then along the Daugava River up to the Smolensk Gate, then from the Smolensk Gate to the mighty Dnieper down its course towards the Black Sea, then its estuary in the Black Sea and the seashore to the mouth of the Dniester and the Danube, ending with the Great Carpathian Chain, interrupted momentarily by the Moravian Gate, and then further along the Sudetes to the Oder Valley, flowing to the Baltic and closing this area just described. A different geological location, a different geographical layout, a different outline of shoreline shapes and surface shapes, different road systems and water communication distinguish the political history of Western Europe. This bizarre mosaic of nationalities, cultures, religions, political tendencies, social temperaments from the history of Eastern Europe, cut off from the oceans and the great roots of economic and social ideas of the world. It is very characteristic that the river systems in Western Europe are more or less symmetrical, and the main river has left and right river basins of approximately the same size, such as the Rhine, the Seine, and other rivers of the west of the continent. However, starting from the Oder to the east, this symmetry clearly ceases. There are many more right tributaries, and they are much longer than the left ones. Such are the Vistula, the Neman and the Daugava basins beyond the Oder. Another thing which is very characteristic, further to the east of the continent, the above feature ceases, and the basins of the Russian rivers are again symmetrical. A perfect example being the Volga. In addition, the river basins of the Baltic-Black Sea Bridge are distinguished by the fact that the peak areas of the river basins of larger tributaries approach very close to the main river of the neighboring river basin. The water divisions are usually very low, narrow and easy to cross. This means that the Intermarium rivers are an excellent communication network that can be easily connected by canals with very short relocations. Hence, hydrographic cohesion is the second feature after convenient connectivity east-west and north-south, and this is where the former Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth existed. Rivers in former times were a great means of communication, and in the Middle Ages in Poland, the water level was even several meters higher than today. The valleys they conditioned also naturally gave directions to land routes. People have always moved and marked roads along river and stream valleys. This is also the case today. So the historical significance of the river network was, especially in the Intermarium, enormous. This can be explained in large part by the natural expansion of the Polish people to the east. In the geopolitical long-duration lens, tributaries of the Oder, then the Vistula, the Neman, the Bug, and even the Dnieper, extended to the east, resembled the arms with which the former Polish Empire reached east. The region's most important communication land gate is the Moravian Gate, located in the western part of Poland and constituting a smooth communication link with the west and south of the continent. Passing through the Carpathian Mountains, however, the gate also indicated an almost inaccessible road through the rocky wastes of the Kars, leading quite laboriously to the Adriatic. Therefore, the Moravian Gate, as a link between the southern and northern seas, in Roman times could not compete with more convenient roads leading through the Alps in the same direction. The Brenner Pass was an especially strong competitor to the Moravian Gate, and the natural communication advantage of the Brenner Pass probably decided that the Adriatic Basin would become an area of German political expansion and not the former Polish dynasty of the Jagiellonians. These weaknesses of the Moravian Gate, along with the nature of the Vistula's water network and other major rivers of the Intermarium, contributed to the fact that the entire history of Poland was branded with expansion to the east. It is this Intermarium, stretched out across the land and not cut through the mountain chains, intertwined with a dense network of natural valley roads, because it is the most important stigma and also the physical condition for the existence and political development of the old state, thus giving Poland a central and pivotal location in the Intermarium, like a crossroad on a communication node, right on line on which the Baltic Sea and the Black Sea turn together, although independently of each other, towards the north. In the history of the last 1000 years, the Baltic-Black Sea Intermarium was a great bastion and at the same time a great military training ground for the powers of the European continent and a huge historical exercise ground through which war campaigns trails run from west to east and from east to west. Not a single war for domination on the continent in modern times, shaking the history of Europe, was spurred to Intermarium. The pressure on the Intermarium continued from the very beginning of the formation of the geopolitical map of Europe, separated from the debris of the ancient world in the 8th century. Strong eastward pressure, geopolitical expansion and demographic expansion followed, which led to the creation of several German states in colonized areas. Over time, two of them began to play a key role: Prussia and Austria. In the 13th and 14th centuries, a Mongolian assault came to the breach, which had previously engulfed China on the other side of the Eurasian landmasses, and devastated the formerly powerful Kievan Rus, simultaneously devastating the vast area from Lower Silesia to the Adriatic and Bulgaria. The answer was the integration of the old state with the potential considered sufficient to stop the attacker. King Casimir the Great annexed Red Ruthenia and made attempts at integration with Hungary, which was also threatened by Mongol invasions, though without lasting effect. It was only the union of Krevo at the end of the 14th century that led the Great Lithuania anchoring with the Baltic Black Sea Bridge. This geostrategic development had an impact on stabilizing the situation on the Baltic Black Sea Bridge for the next 400 years. Perhaps the newly created balance also gave the opportunity for more peaceful development of the European Rimland area closer to the Adriatic, because it cushioned pressure from the steppes and from Asia Minor and ultimately from rising Moscow. Finally formed in the 16th century, the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth integrated Poland, Lithuania, the Principality of Polsk, today Belarus, and Kiev and Ruthenia, today Ukraine, fulfilling the Intermarium organizational concept. Both neighboring powers, Germany and Muscovite, appreciated the danger that could threaten their wage ambitions in the form of the Baltic Black Sea Bridge and tried to reduce the power of the Commonwealth and absorb as much of the Intermarium potential as possible. Ultimately, this goal was achieved. The partitions at the end of the 18th century and the Congress of Vienna confirming it resulted in the creation of a provisional demarcation line dividing the Baltic Black Sea Bridge for the next 100 years, the course of which was dictated primarily by the historical expansion of Russia and Prussia, now Germany. The political chaos that arose after World War I gave hope for the revival of the idea of the unity of the bridge, which was pursued by Józef Piłsudski. However, the success of the creation of the Polish state and the defense of the young state against the Soviets was not followed by the success of the integration of the eastern part of the bridge. A large part of Belarus and Ukraine fell within the borders of the Soviet Union. It was a failure of Piłsudski's plan to form a federal bridge structure also covering its eastern part. All the Baltic Black Sea region states had a common denominator: the desire to rebuild the geopolitical weight of the Baltic Black Sea Intermarium in order to build up the proper balancing against the Soviet continental empire and to counter Germany's economic hegemony in Central and Eastern Europe. Eventually, in 1939, this interwar attempt ended in disaster when the Soviets and the Germans came to an agreement on the division of the spoils in the Intermarium. The Soviets and Germany concluded in the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact aimed at the abolition of Polish statehood and thus any Intermarium ambitions, completely changing the balance of power on the continent, actually for many decades, literally up to 1991. Although the Germans lost and the Soviets in turn won the Second World War and by shifting Poland's borders to the west captured the entire Baltic Black Sea Intermarium by imposing its will on Poland in the years 1944-1989 and only allowing a relative degree of internal autonomy of the Polish satellite state. At the end of the 1950s, two Poles, Juliusz Mieroszewski and Jerzy Giedroyć, formulated a geopolitical doctrine that contained a simple maxim: there can be no independent Poland without a free Lithuania, Belarus and Ukraine. The editor-in-chief of Paris-based émigré magazine Kultura called for the recognition of the independence of the Belarusians, Ukrainians and Lithuanians, to help them regain independence regardless of whether they would be loyal to Poland in the future or not. He argued that the very fact of the existence of independent neighbors pushes away the danger of a clash with Russia again. The concept was based, in a huge simplification, on the assumption that Russia would not be able to pose a threat to Poland if the two long-time rivals would be divided by the independent countries of the eastern part of the Intermarium, at the time Soviet republics. Therefore, since 1990s, the goal of Poland after the collapse of the Soviet Union was both to support the emergence of these countries and to care for good neighborly relations so that they would not fall back into Russia's orbit. The basic condition for these good neighborly relations was, of course, the renunciation of all revisionist moods and domination on the part of Poland on the Baltic Black Intermarium. In addition, after 1991, the history of the Polish part of the Intermarium has been associated with the geopolitical world of the Atlantic, represented by the American advanced military presence in Europe, within NATO, and in the economic sphere with the whole of the West as an entity organizing the global system of economic exchange with the entire institutional architecture of Bretton Woods, including in particular with more developed Western European countries in cooperation within the European community. We are currently dealing with a shift of the world order caused by China's and Russia's questioning of US primacy. The more urgent it seems to understand who we are and where our place is. This, in turn, will result in an understanding of our interests, and from a proper understanding of this might come our own grand strategy. Meanwhile, unlike the remembered Turkish, German or Russian empires, the construct of the Commonwealth's land empire was forgotten in the West, whilst for many centuries held the balance on the continent, creating a separate core area in a pivotal place of Europe and Eurasia, shaping a separate civilization and a strategic culture serving it. Such a position poses many requirements, but gives Poland many instruments of pressure that provide strength and voice in international politics. This is the primary geopolitical feature of the entire bridge, which causes overwhelming pressure from external forces on Poland, especially when the world order changes. Similar to Turkey in the Middle East, geography means that in the case of a potential concert of powers on the Baltic Black Sea Bridge, it is impossible to establish a new security architecture without Warsaw's consent, which, for example, invalidates the role of Germany as the alleged guarantor of such a deal. It is crucial for our present and future leaders to understand the benefits of Poland's pin-like position and the resulting instruments of pressure on other players in the region, all the more when the world order is faltering.